Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. I am Nick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends, wives, boyfriends, and husbands. A very warm welcome to Movies TV Mad and Sunday's edition of the DCU Daily. Now, today we're going to do something a little different. So, I don't expect this video to get as many likes or views as I've been getting in the past 2 to 3 weeks, and that's okay, but I really wanted to discuss this. I want to discuss what motivated me to write a Superman script, to write a Superman film a few years back. The inspirations were the divisive conversations after Man of Steel in 2013. There was this huge debate after we saw Superman kill Zod. And there was this debate, some people believing it's fine that Superman killed, defending that decision by David Goyer and Zack Snyder. There's other people saying Superman shouldn't kill. He's never killed before in a film or in a comic. And people who were defending Man of Steel saying, well, hang on a minute, Superman killed the 3 villains from Krypton in Superman 2 when he chucked them down the little slidey bits in the Fortress of Solitude. As a kid, I just assumed they harmlessly slid down somewhere and he was going to imprison them afterwards. But, hey, I digress. Maybe they actually died. But we didn't see Superman batter them to death or break their necks. So there's a bit of a difference there. And listen, I am not the foremost authority on every Superman comic. I'm a TV guy. I'm a movie guy, right? So that's what inspired me. Man of Steel and that discussion partially inspired me to write my Superman movie. But then, while that discussion and that negativity was going on, I watched a little animated movie called Superman versus the Elite. It was an adaptation of a string of mini graphic novels. I'd never read the comics before. I still haven't read those mini graphic novels before. But that animated movie was really well adapted, and it was the polar opposite of Man of Steel. What interested me in the Superman vs. the Elite animated movie adaptation was it put Superman's no-kill policy on trial. We have these metahumans called the Elite, run by this British northern guy, probably from Manchester, I think, called Manchester Black, right? So I'm assuming he's from Manchester. He had this terrible background. He and his sister were basically abused by their drunken father. It's a very fucking interesting story. And at first, Manchester Black and Superman get on. But then Black is pushing Superman to be a killer. Manchester Black's kind of logic is, if you kill every criminal, they won't come back for more. Superman pushes back, and then Manchester Black starts pushing propaganda via the media. And people start turning on Superman for not killing. To cut a long story short, in the end, after they kick the living shit out of Superman, he starts saying, okay, you want me to kill? I'm going to kill you. And Manchester Black starts regretting everything. This isn't you, because when he thinks that his elite team have been killed by Superman, right? It's all a trick from Superman, and he's the last one standing, and Superman's bruised and battered, and he's acting like a lunatic, and Manchester actually believes Superman is going to kill him. This isn't you! You don't kill! You don't do this! No, Superman says, and I never will. The hairs on the back of my fucking neck stood up. I thought, wow, this is a great defense in the modern day of Superman's no-kill policy. I had tears coming down my eyes. So we live in an era of adapting, reinventing existing iconic properties and characters. And there's a responsibility with adapting pre-existing properties and IPs, because you have to be faithful to that material. Because if you're not going to be faithful to that material, if Superman suddenly becomes something and somebody totally different, why don't you just create your own character? Well, we saw a CTU agent called Jack Bauer torturing terrorists, etc., etc. Most of us were fine with that because Jack Bauer wasn't a pre-existing character. 24 wasn't a pre-existing IP. It's fine for Jack Bauer in most of our minds to be doing that. That's who he is, right? And that's fine. But when you're playing around with pre-existing characters and properties, you do have to be faithful to that material. I love Man of Steel, but what Goya and Snyder do with Man of Steel is say, this Superman character, we need to make him more relatable. We have to make him a post 9/11 character. And this is a Superman in a grounded universe, in a real world. In that real world, he would have to kill. Sometimes he would have no choice but to kill. Basically, it's very, very self-indulgent. As much as I love Goya's writing, with all his CBMs that he's done, and as much as I love Snyder's movies, and I do, I'm a Snyder lover, not a hater, it's very, very self-indulgent. As I said the other day, we live in an era and culture of art, of very self-indulgent art. Denis Villeneuve is a very self-indulgent director. Christopher Nolan is a very self-indulgent director. It's no longer about entertaining the public, the cinema-going and TV-watching audience. It's about what creatives want to do with pre-existing characters and properties. I love most of what I saw in Man of Steel. I love the bit when Zod is threatening Martha and Superman does this whole, you think you can threaten my mother, and he's punching the living shit out of him. But there's a problem during that scene. Superman just crashes into that petrol station with Zod. People obviously died in that petrol station. That, my friends, isn't Superman in any way, shape or form. That's a problem. And the fact, when I first saw Superman kill Zod, I didn't have any particular problems with it because it was a brand new movie and all of that. But I understand the hardcore fan base being upset by that because he doesn't just kill Zod, he breaks the guy's neck. And yes, he had no choice, but it was Goya who put the character in a no-win scenario. And ultimately, Superman is a very, very whimsical, safe character. In Superman 78, nobody dies. When people went into the cinema to see Superman 78, they were weary and battered from the Vietnam War and everything that happened with Nixon. And they came out thinking the world had more brighter, optimistic possibilities. It's the same as The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz was released during the Depression, near the end of the Depression, and on the eve of World War II. They went in weary. They were used to watching black and white movies. They went in and they saw a movie that Dorothy's in this black and white world. It's all very depressing and she's not happy about her reality, but then she enters this colourful fantasy land. So they leave this depression in the real world and they're shown this colourful world. And what happens is people come out the cinema feeling uplifted and inspired. It's the same as Back to the Future. It's the same as E.T. Movies used to be inspirational. They used to make you feel like $1 million fucking bucks. Even Gunn's first Guardians of the Galaxy, when you come out of the cinema, you do feel, $1 million bucks. But today, what's happened, creatives are all reinventing these existing characters and they're turning them into kind of something that they're not. And this is what happens with Superman in Man of Steel. And they double down on this even deeper in Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. These are two Superman interpretations I absolutely love personally. But it hurt their capacity to make money. It hurt the capacity of the franchise being more successful and continuing. Because this is Superman. This is not who he is. Now, Smallville were quite smart. When they wanted to make Clark a little bit darker, he was on Red K. It took away his inhibitions. And, as a viewer and a fan of Superman, you could have fun with that premise. So this is why I decided to write my adaptation of Superman versus the Elite. But I decided to do something a little bit different. I wanted to set it in the 80s. I wanted Superman to have been on the planet Earth for decades and decades and decades. So I thought, have it in the 80s because I wanted print. I wanted print press, print journalism to be relevant. That's why I think Superman doesn't work in the modern day. Because newspapers are no longer relevant, as I mentioned that to you the other day. So I wanted to set this in the 80s. And I didn't just want to use Manchester Black and the Elite. I wanted to use John Corbin and Metallo. Now, in my script, John Corbin is Clark Kent and Lois Lane's best friend. They work in the Daily Planet together. And Manchester Black comes up with this plan, basically. He knows that Clark Kent and Superman are the same person. So he feels if he murders John Corbin, Clark's best friend, that he can and make him Metallo and control him via a chip to cause mayhem and murder. Superman will have no choice but to start killing him and other villains. He basically uses Metallo to cause propaganda, to whip up a campaign so the public are also pressuring Superman to kill. And what I do in my script with John Corbin's murder is kind of similar to how Murphy is murdered by those villains in the first RoboCop. Slightly not as dark because it is a Superman film, but it's a very, very cruel murder. You see him losing his humanity. They turn him into Metallo. He has the chip in his head. And Lex Luthor is in this film, but he's not a villain. He's someone that Superman has to go to eventually for help to defeat the Elite and Metallo. This script has kind of Captain America and the Winter Soldier kind of vibe, because Superman is in a no-win catch-22 situation. John Corbin was his best friend, and now he's this merciless killer that makes Clark weak because he has a kryptonite heart. My decision to use domestic villains like Manchester Black and the Elite and Metallo was me being tired of every CBM being about an alien invasion. And one of the things I really hate about a lot of these movies now is how the public can just see all these aliens invading, and then the world just goes back to normal afterwards. And it's like, to me, they're all the same now. There's always an alien threat. So one of the things I wanted to do was have domestic villains, and villains that have never been used in a movie. Now, we've seen Metallo in Smallville. I thought that Brian Austin Green in Smallville was a brilliant Metallo. And we've seen him in Supergirl, not such a good adaptation of Metallo, if you ask me. So I really wanted to make this a personal story for Superman and for John Corbin as Metallo. He's not really a villain. You know, this is a guy who's got no control of his actions. And this is a very deep situation for Lois Lane as well, who was very close to John Corbin. Now, Superman, Clark Kent and Lois are not in a romantic relationship anymore. The romantic story is between Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, Clark and Superman. That's their little... I decided to go there because I've always wanted in live action to see Wonder Woman and Superman have this romance, and I would have liked to have seen that in the Snyderverse as well, by the way, but they didn't go there. I think I'm kind of bored of seeing the Lois and Clark romance. We saw it in the Reeveverse, we saw it in Superman Returns, you know, we eventually saw it in Smallville in the Lois and Clark show, Superman and Lois. I'm tired of it. I want Lois Lane there. I think she's a remarkable character. She's a compassionate character. The reason she's a journalist is because she wants to expose corruption. And I love her. And I want her part of my story. But I didn't want to do the whole Lois and Clark love story all over again. So while Superman's being pressured in the modern day in my script to be a killer, he flashes back to the Second World War, where he's being pressured by the Allies and governments of the world to kill German Nazi soldiers and basically murder Hitler. Superman refuses and people start turning on him. We see him in these flashbacks using his heat vision to destroy concentration camps and help injured German and Allied soldiers. He doesn't want to take sides. He was sent to Earth to protect all humanity. It's not for Superman to decide who's right and wrong. Superman is a helper, right? He knows what the Nazis and Hitler is doing is wrong. But he has this no-kill policy. That's the whole point of the film. My film is to put the no-kill policy on trial and for the audience to have to decide who's right, Manchester Black or Superman. And by the end of the film, if I've done my job right, like the animated Superman vs. Elite movie and the comics, right, the graphic novels do, you should feel that Superman's right. But we are part of a very jaded generation. There's many people who fell in love with Superman via Man of Steel. There's young men who liked the fact that Superman murdered a villain, and that's why they became fans of the Cavill Superman. There's all this talk about Homelander being, a murderous version of Superman. I hate those fucking comparisons, and I hated the conversations about James Gunn's Brightburn, that was an evil Superman. To me, that's not what that is. It's bullshit, but Superman isn't fucking evil. He ain't a murderous demon. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. He's not a murderous demon. He's a hero. He's a pure 1938 hero. He was invented at a time when the male hero was very important. One of the problems with our entertainment and our culture today is the eradication of the male hero. Some of that is from woke culture, but a film like Man of Steel has also helped eradicate the male hero. I grew up with characters like Hannibal Smith from the A-Team, Michael Knight from Knight Rider, Sam Beckett from Quantum Leap, Jonathan Smith from Highway to Heaven. I grew up in the era, Indiana Jones, I grew up in the era of the male hero. And modern entertainment culture has eradicated that in the name of diversity. I don't understand what's so diverse about eradicating one demographic to uplift the other demographic, which is female heroes. What I think is uplifting and diverse is to keep the male hero and uplift the female hero at the same time. But when you're an extremist in an echo chamber of an entertainment industry, you're not really interested in that. So they have eradicated the male hero. So now young men don't have male heroes with a strong willpower and moral core to be inspired by. I saw an interview with a Smallville fan once. He was at college, he was going to steal some cutlery, and then he said, Clark would frown on this. Clark Kent would frown on this from Smallville. He wouldn't steal, neither should I. That's the point I'm making. Now all of a sudden, we have negative male characters. We have males on social media bragging about abusing women and young men looking up to that toxic behavior. But when I was growing up, we had these moral, heroic ideals to look up to. And it really helps. And this is the power of stories and entertainment and art. And by saying it's okay for Superman to kill, you give young men something different, something darker, something less pure to look up to. And what you do, you breed worse human beings. So I understand people's issues about the Cavill Superman killing Zod. And as I've said before, killing Zod is dumb. He's one of the best written villains in a comic book movie. There was lots of potential for him to be in a direct Man of Steel 2, and I had an idea with that as well. I wanted at the end Superman and the Kryptonians to be banished to the Phantom Zone, and I wanted Zod and Superman to kind of bond in the Phantom Zone in the end, while Brainiac's in the modern day, he's invading Earth, and then eventually somehow Superman and the Kryptonians escape the Phantom Zone and they join forces to defeat Brainiac and Zod sacrifices himself for the planet Earth and Superman. Imagine what a journey that's been after Man of Steel. So that's the kind of writer and storyteller I am. I look to inspire. Superman was created as a figure of inspiration. And I always said this, as much as I love Man of Steel, if Snyder wants a kind of grounded, real-world contemporary superhero, he should create his own. He's got this wonderful visual art. I love his movies. But there's certain things that they did with Superman that you can't get away with. But James Gunn got lots of other things wrong about Superman, right? So what fans want is a goddamn feel-good Superman movie, which James Gunn attempted. And I believe my movie does everything. And, you know, you've got to cast a good actor for what I want him to do in this movie. He has to be a strong actor, and he has to look like Superman. I want him bulked up like in the comics, and I want to use an accurate comic book version of the costume. Gunn's costume is terrible. It takes away the body mass that David worked so hard to amass, basically. That's what Brandon's Superman costume did. I don't want to create an original Superman costume. I want to use a version from the comics. In the flashbacks during the Second World War, he would be wearing his very first comic book costume from Action Comics #1. And maybe he would wear that costume throughout the movie, even in the modern times during the 80s. I don't know. Maybe that would be a good idea. Just let him wear that original costume. Don't flash it up a bit, you know. It's a basic kind of circus acrobat costume anyway. Why not keep it as that, but be accurate? I think fellow Superman fans would love Superman to be wearing that first ever designed costume by, you know, I think it's Joe Shuster was the artist, wasn't he? And Jerry Siegel was the writer. So by Joe Shuster. So I'd like to do that. But this is an emotional movie that challenges Superman's morality and willpower and ideals. And this is what Superman versus the Elite, the animated adaptation, did for me during a very negative time where people were arguing about Man of Steel and whether Superman should kill. I don't want, ultimately, I love Man of Steel, but I don't want to see Superman killing people. I don't want to see Superman breaking somebody's neck. And what you do is you take away kind of, you know, the family audience away from that, which is what they did. That movie, if it did certain things differently, would have made $1 billion. It's such a well-made movie. It's so good. Snyder is an amazing director, and Nolan and Goya wrote an amazing story, and Goya wrote a pretty much great screenplay. But it was also very self-indulgent. And that's what my movie is. We take, basically, you've got Manchester Black, who takes the humanity away from John Corbin, a good man. I don't just want to flash back to the Second World War either. Maybe we'll see Superman riding his super horse. Maybe we'll see Beppo the super monkey in flashbacks. Because this is an older Superman, maybe in his 40s, 50s, late 50s, whatever, you can use slightly an older actor and you can say, this is a Superman with experience that's had this no-kill policy, but now the modern world is different. It's a tired culture. We are a tired culture. We have become lost as a culture if you think that it's okay for Superman to kill. It's fine for some characters to kill. As I say, when you are adapting a pre-existing property and character, there are responsibilities. And this all goes back to the eradication of the male hero. We are not inspiring young men to be good young men. We've got Trump. We've got idiots on social media inspiring young men to treat women and girls badly. We need to go back to the male hero and rebuild that. Because I don't just believe that boys and men are inspired by the male hero. When I was growing up, girls and women were inspired by them as well. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll be back tomorrow.